The Bitcoin market is turning, and now all signs are pointing back to hyper bullish. Plus, it's got people ready to drop the next Bitcoin bomb. We've got one Bitcoin bomb after another here, because people are confirming here that the Donald Trump administration is planning a new crypto regulation. Let's take a look at what this regulation says. Also, we're going to look at why the Bitcoin price is pumping right now, because of the inflation data. They're causing a surge here. Bitcoin is still very much tied to the US dollar, with the US economy. And depending on how the signs are in the US economy, that's how the capital market and Bitcoin will behave as well. And it really looks very good. Also, the US government has now decided, the nearly 90,000, to return the confiscated Bitcoins from the Bitfinex hack here. And that's in Bitcoin. That means these Bitcoins are definitely not going to be sold here. What can cause another surge here? Because we have less selling pressure. But let's really start with the Bitcoin price, because we've seen Bitcoin drops to 90,000. It's almost back to 100,000. By the time this video is published, it might already be over 100,000, who knows? And that's basically exactly what I've talked about so many times. And I think I even made a video about it just a week ago. Bitcoin fake crash, that wasn't the crash, but one before it. And we see that quite often, that there are fake crashes in this bull market. Then, of course, people write in the comments, that's not a fake crash, the Bitcoin price is clearly dropping. No, those are fake crashes because they're not real crashes. They're just pullbacks. There are opportunities to buy in again here, but the market still has a fundamentally positive, bullish sentiment, and we're seeing that play out now. Because it doesn't make sense that the bull market is already over. A lot of people have called the end here. Bitcoin is now entering the bull market. But no, we just saw a fake crash here, and now we see that the bull market is just continuing normally here. We've got a massive week ahead of us with a ton of things happening here. Donald Trump is going to meet with Michael Saylor. Then comes the inauguration. Now we have the new crypto regulation that we're going to take a look at right now. But first, let's take a look at the inflation data in the US, because it's better than expected. US inflation came in at 2.9%, which is in line with expectations. The core inflation relevant for the Federal Reserve is MIT. 3.2%, slightly below the consensus estimate of 3.3%. And you can see here, this isn't exactly a Godzilla candle, but at least it's like a baby Godzilla or whatever you want to call it. I told you so, Maurice Hofgen by the fucking dip candle or whatever you want to call it. So we can definitely see here that the sentiment is really, really positive again. And that's always crazy with Bitcoin. They just have these crazy shifts. So all of a sudden, Bitcoin is dead. And a moment later, Bitcoin is back here. All of a sudden, we're fully in a bull market. And we see this a lot with Bitcoin, that the sentiment can shift back and forth really quickly. And I think the last videos, every video I've made recently, was one bombshell after another. There were various revelations. Like, for example, that Trump is meeting with Saylor. Or then there was the story with Adam Beck, who released Trump's Bitcoin holdings. Then there was the leak in the Washington Post, where an insider reported on the executive order. Before that, there were already stories from Zach Mallers, who also talked about the executive order, and so on. So, almost every day there are new revelations here. And now we actually have the next bombshell here, because it's being said here by people. Trump's new SEC leadership is set to kickstart a crypto overhaul, sources say. So here it is. According to people, Donald Trump is supposed to start revising the crypto regulations with the new SEC as early as next week, because this is really quite explosive. According to sources, Donald Trump is supposed to start revising the crypto regulations with the new SEC as early as next week, because this is really highly sensitive. And it clearly means that the regulation. Here, it's about how Bitcoin is performing. And this is so important for the Bitcoin price for investors. And also for big capital, that there's trust in the U.S. currency and economic space basically going all in on Bitcoin. Right now, we still have a lot of people who are holding back their capital. Once this goes through, the likelihood is very high that new capital is flowing back into Bitcoin. There are actually different things that are planned here. And there are three main components here. First, lawsuits without fraud allegations could be frozen. So all the people sued for Bitcoin services, people were also debanked because they had some kind of Bitcoin services. Or, for example, people were also debanked, excluded from the financial system. People who were involved with Bitcoin and at the same time were somehow active in the banking system. They are simply cut off from doing business here. Purpose messed up. The banking systems were shut down, such things. That means they basically rendered them unable to act. And there were, of course, court rulings here. And these court rulings couldn't be made here. That would definitely include Ross Ulbricht, of course. I don't know if there are any other cases like that. There are probably a few other big court cases, especially in the whole crypto saga with Bitcoin. Probably not that much, especially in the entire crypto history. There are a lot of unresolved issues with Coinbase, too. And what do I know? What else is still open? Ross Ulbricht should normally be released on the very first day, by executive order, if Donald Trump keeps his promise here. But here, the regulation would also have to apply to other people, who are also locked up here, maybe like Ross Ulbricht, because of Bitcoin stuff, etc., are incarcerated here. The court proceedings are dropped. It says in the second point, ongoing cases will be reviewed to avoid unnecessary proceedings. So they just say here, for example, before we open a court case. If it opens up, we'd rather check it again. And if necessary, we'll just drop it here. At least that's how I understand it, that they're generally a bit lenient here. Basically, with all the charges and so on. There have actually been 1 or 2 cases like that. Not with Bitcoin right now, but basically because of crypto regulation, where even the SEC ended up being wrong in hindsight, that the SEC is just suing people here. They've been throwing people under the bus left and right just to mess with folks or something like that. And there have already been some court cases. Even without the regulation, there's already been a backlash against the SEC. And it was made very clear here, no, you guys are messing this up. Stop suing all these people, will ya? Then it says here as a last point, for the industry, this means less uncertainty and more focus on innovation instead of litigation. And that's basically it. You have to be sure about this, that you can run a business here without getting sued here. You have to be sure that you can run a business without the bureaucratic hassle being too high. And only then do you attract capital. Only then do you also attract, let's say, a whole lot of innovation. And that's basically something similar to what's happening right now in El Salvador. El Salvador has basically already implemented the crypto regulation here. And that's why there are now big Bitcoin banks going to El Salvador. They're about to open a really big Bitcoin bank here. Additionally, we also see Tether, which is kind of like a Bitcoin bank, or not a Bitcoin bank, but a stablecoin bank. That's also heading to El Salvador. And Tether is also a huge holder of Bitcoin. And they're definitely going there. Not because there's some crappy regulation, but because there's a really, really good Bitcoin regulation there. A really, really good regulation for stablecoins and digital assets. And that's basically what the USA wants to do here. And maybe Mr. Tether will think about going back to the USA. I don't know. But it's very, very interesting. That's definitely ultra bullish for Bitcoin here. And then we have a second very, very important point here. And it's about here. The stolen Bitcoin from Bitfinex. And I wasn't sure for a long time what would happen with them. What happens to them? There were also the other rumors. With the others, it was 69,000 Bitcoin or something like that, which should be sold here in the USA. That were basically confiscated from another court case here. Bitfinex, those are different coins. But here, something very, very important is actually being decided. And that's the US government. The stolen Bitcoins are coming back here. The US government has made a decision. The Bitcoins seized in the Bitfinex hack of 2016 are set to be returned directly to Bitfinex as in kind, restitution. In the case of the seized Bitcoins, this means that the coins will be returned to Bitfinex as Bitcoin and not as their current cash value in fiat currencies, like dollars or whatever. So, no selling. In August 2016, a hack of the cryptocurrency exchange Bitfinex resulted in a total of 119,000 Bitcoins being stolen. Bitcoin stolen. The US authorities were later able to arrest about 94,000. These seized stolen Bitcoins. Now it's about the 94,000 Bitcoin. And in the end, that's really, really good. Because if somehow 94,000 Bitcoins were sold here, that definitely isn't going to happen, no. Bitcoin will be sold, and that's definitely not going to happen here. Then there will be selling pressure here again. Then that could slow down the bull run here again. And we can clearly see here, no, they will not be sold off. And that's very, very positive for Bitcoin. Could be that when they're returned, Bitcoins are paid out and then sold. What do I know? Maybe the Bitcoins will be paid out, and then at some point, people might, let's say, sell them or something like that. I don't really know either. What's happening now? Or does the exchange, the Bitfinex exchange, keep it? I don't know. Actually, there are still some people behind this who have a claim to it. But I don't know the details here, how that all plays out. At some point, they would have to be paid out again. But until that happens, it might even take a few more years. But the last statement here is without guarantee, because I actually don't have any details about the Bitfinex hack here. I have that in the back of my mind, and now we just need to see how things play out. How the whole game with the US economy is currently developing. How the liquidity develops here. How the strength of the dollar develops here. And depending on how this goes, we could also roughly estimate how the Bitcoin price will continue. First of all, that's very, very positive. That Bitcoin is very, very strong. So now at 100,000, even though the dollar is really strong, that's already a really, really good sign. And what if the dollar weakens here? Because we have now seen that here the inflation numbers, are. That also means that the Federal Reserve can potentially lower interest rates now. When it has inflation under control, then there's really no reason to be overly restrictive here. But they could actually lower the interest rates here. Could it strengthen the economy even more, or could it generally strengthen the economy? And that would pump Bitcoin again. That would naturally, let's say, weaken the dollar a bit. But at some point, the US has to pay attention. That basically the dollar doesn't become too strong, or the US can't. You can't have an infinitely strong currency, because otherwise certain problems will arise in the US again. Those are just always the export and import stories. If you have, let's say, an overly strong currency, then it's tough to export things from your own country because the goods become just too expensive for foreign countries. And if you have a currency that's too weak, then you have the exact opposite problem. So you always have to find a certain balance. And if you have a currency that's too weak, then you have the exact opposite problem. And that's why you always have to find a certain balance. And there are already a whole bunch of countries just waiting for this. Kind of here. That the US is weakening the dollar a bit, or that interest rates are being lowered. Because when the dollar gets weaker, then other countries like China and so on can start printing money massively. That means many countries are looking at the US, they want to print money, but they can't do it yet because the dollar is too strong here. And if the dollar really, let's say, gives in a bit, when you notice that inflation is under control, then you can lower the interest rates. Then other countries will follow suit. And then there's this huge money orgy again. And who usually benefits the most from printing money? And that's just it here, Bitcoin. And that's the scenario that's very likely right now, and it's something we just have to keep an eye on. And by the way, I'm still here in Paraguay. Let me show you here on the rooftop. I've been wandering around the city a bit now. It's really interesting. Here's the city, but it's also a bit boring, because there's relatively little to do here and stuff. I'm about to meet someone here. I actually got my Zedua done earlier. Here, because a lot of people have been asking, what are you doing here in Paraguay? What's there to do? Actually, I'm getting my C dollar done here. It's basically a residency permit for Paraguay because it's really, really easy to get. And it's just like a plan, B-freedom document that you have. That means you can not only move to Paraguay, but also to a few other South American countries. Or, I don't know, Central American countries, definitely a few countries around here. I think even Argentina and stuff, you can just move here anytime. For example, if something breaks out like Corona, or if, I don't know, somehow the borders get closed. There are different scenarios, or if a war breaks out, then you can also be independent, even if you don't have a German passport. Just take the C dollar and I can say, okay, I'm going to Paraguay, I'm going somewhere else. So I already have a residency permit. That means it's just a backup. Additionally, it's also a residence that you can have here. And if you're on the road, like I am, without a permanent residence, if you're deregistered in Germany, if you're a perpetual traveler or something like that, then it can definitely make sense. Here, for example, is a C dollar. To have something like a compliance residence here in Paraguay. Because the question is, what do you do if you're always traveling? Which residence do you put down then? Then you don't have any at all, but here you can build something like that up. Such a construct. For example, I met a woman here earlier who also got the cedula with me here. In the end, she's going to Paraguay. She gets a cedula to cash out her Bitcoin. That means it's really, really awesome. So you can basically cash out your Bitcoin outside of Europe. Because she's from Switzerland. And she says, well, I'm not going to name the person. So, of course, there's discretion here. But she says, well, she has such huge Bitcoin gains, Bitcoin holdings, that even the small taxes she would have to pay here in Switzerland, that it's basically too much for her. Above all, I'm not sure how it is in Switzerland, but I think at the business level, you have to pay taxes there. Payments. I don't know how it is privately. Business-wise, I have no idea. You guys can write it in the comments below. She's definitely going there to cash out outside of the EU. Those are also kinds of constructs you can think about when, for example, the EU becomes, let's say, more restrictive. And so you can really start building things in countries outside the EU or something like that. Because a lot of people just don't see the point in taxing their Bitcoin gains at some point. I mean, in Germany, you don't have to do that right now, but that could change at any time. And then you already have a backup plan set up. And the problem is, if you don't make that backup plan now, then it could be that in 3 years you wake up and the EU has completely shut down, and then also the cedula. What's going to get a lot harder is making a CD. It's becoming increasingly difficult. It has definitely tightened up in recent years. And that's why it can just be a cool thing to do here. But of course, it shouldn't be an ad. You can do it however you want. You can. It's totally fine for everyone to stay in Germany or Switzerland or whatever. I just think it's always cool to have multiple options here, and that's why I'm here. The process I'm going through here. Very, very interesting to play through and experience all of this. For sure, if you don't want to buy right now, I'll put a link down below for you. 21 Bitcoin, the easiest way to buy Bitcoin in Europe. Here, you can get up to 20% off the fees when buying Bitcoin with the code Bitcoin. I'm signing off from the cool Asocian in Paraguay. See you later. Peace out.